Thank you very much, Chairman Bell, Chairperson Wolk, honorable members of this committee. My name is Dan Richard. I'm the chair of the High Speed Rail Authority Board. With me is our CEO, Jeff Morales. We're going to give you a very brief overview today, and per your request, we do have a brief PowerPoint. We'd like to leave as much time as possible for questions and colloquy, so we're going to hit this pretty quickly and at high level. I guess, where do I point this? Okay, do you mind helping me? As was noted, this is our 2016 business plan, and just to remind you, the business plan is required by statute. The legislature has required that we provide every 2 years a business plan that talks about the status of the project and a number of factors, including costs and risks, and we have endeavored to do that. As we'll indicate, this is a draft business plan, and again, that's per the statute, to give the public and the legislature an opportunity to review it and to comment. And we'll be submitting the final version to you by the statutory deadline of May 1. As we say here, it is a foundational document for implementing the program, and it does talk about our progress over the last several years, and including the approach to using funds. And let me just say one thing about progress. Chair Wolk mentioned that she had some skepticism in 2012 about the ability of the authority to deliver the project. In 2012, I shared that skepticism, and at that time, when we came in and we took over this program, it only had half the people that the legislature had authorized for 2 years. It didn't have a chief risk officer. It didn't have a number of key positions. All of that has turned around. We now have a fully functioning organization of both a lean organization of state employees as well as contractors. And we're happy to get into the details, but I can tell you sitting here today that the biggest change over the last several years has been the change in the organization's growth, maturity, and ability to deliver this, and in particular with some very sophisticated tools, and I think you'll hear some of this if you ask the peer review group in terms of our approach to ridership and risk analysis and things like that. So there are more details about that in the plan, but Madam Chair, since you raised this, I wanted to address that question. The other big news in terms of progress over the last 2 years is we are now in construction building America's first true high-speed rail system. That itself has changed the dynamic quite significantly. This plan does have updated ridership forecasts and cost estimates. It talks about the next milestones and so forth. And it talks about what we can deliver with existing funds that either are in hand or have been allocated to us, and obviously there are some assumptions there that we're all aware of. Turning next to the plan itself, because this is a combination of a fiscal overview as well as a programmatic overview, I would like to start with one bit of good news, which is that this is a very expensive project, as you know, but our current projections have actually brought the cost of the project down by about $5.5 billion over what we estimated 2 years ago. Now, it really went from about $68 billion to about $62 billion. But looking at those savings, we have reinvested $2 billion to upscope the project in Southern California in the corridor between Burbank, Los Angeles, and Anaheim. That's a very important corridor. It will form the basis for ultimate high-speed rail service there. There's currently freight rail as well as Metrolink service there. There are a number of things that should happen in that corridor, and we now think that we can put additional tracks and other upgrades in there. So went from 68 to 62 with a rescoping upwards to make it a $64 billion program. And I should point out that that's denominated in fully inflated year of expenditure dollars, which is somewhat unusual for projects. Most projects talk to you only in terms of current year dollars. Not to pat ourselves on the back because you require us to give you both current year as well as fully inflated year of expenditure dollars, and we have done that in this business plan. As was noted by Chairman Bell and by Chair Wolk, the big change is in the sequencing, and I use that word deliberately and emphatically. We're not leaving anybody behind. Our mission is to do exactly what the public asked for in 2008 in Proposition 1A, which is to build a fully electrified, high-speed system that is designed to achieve transit from downtown Los Angeles to downtown San Francisco in no more than 2 hours 40 minutes, and to be able to operate without an operating subsidy, as other high-speed rail systems in the world do. That is still our mission. That is still what we're doing. What we are presenting to you is our thought that the best way to achieve that ultimate goal is to resequence and to look at what we call the valley-to-valley line from Central Valley to Silicon Valley. Now, let me just take a moment and go back to some of the earlier business plans that we had. As was alluded to before, in 2012 and in 2014, it was our view that starting in the Central Valley, which those were the cards that were given to us when we came in, that the best thing to do was to build south to connect to Los Angeles. And in a totally unconstrained world, that still might make sense because there's more population and therefore higher ridership to the south, and it costs more. And if it costs more, it makes some sense to build it first to deal with inflationary effects. However, we looked at basic math. The most important thing for this program at this point is to get operational service up and running that's consistent with the Bond Act. That means meeting all the provisions of the Bond Act and operating without a subsidy. Operating without a subsidy means that we open up the opportunity for private sector investment. They're looking for that first operating line. So the basic math was it would take about $30 billion to connect the Central Valley to Los Angeles. It would take about $20 billion to connect the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley. That $20 billion investment could open up $8 to $10 billion of private sector investment, and it made sense to do that first. And that was the genesis. It's not because the mountains are too high, because we're going to go over those mountains anyway. It's not because of other difficulties. It's simply that with the available dollars that we have in hand or allocated to us, that's a system we can get up and running for the people of California. And it's a system that not only is self-sustaining but has real meaning in terms of the connection of two very important economic regions of our state. Silicon Valley, which is plagued with housing limitations, and the Central Valley, which is plagued with persistent underinvestment and lack of economic diversity. So it is something that's meritorious and something that we can do. We can have it operational by 2025, and it would connect with the current southern terminus of our construction in the Central Valley to San Jose. And then, because of the work that we're doing with our partners at Caltrain, we would be able, through their electrification program that we're participating in, to get trains all the way into San Francisco. Now, one of the things that has received some commentary is that the southern terminus of where we're currently building right now is north of Bakersfield. And for a lot of people, it would make more sense to go all the way into Bakersfield. For us, it would make more sense to go all the way into Bakersfield. It's about an additional 22 miles, and the cost of that, plus upgrading between San Jose and San Francisco, which would really give us an excellent level of service there, would be another $2.9 billion. As I indicated, we're presenting to you in this draft plan what we feel we have the funds to build with dollars in hand or currently allocated. The $2.9 billion is in excess of that, but it still makes sense. That $2.9 billion of additional investment would generate $4.7 billion of ridership revenue, which would translate into an equivalent amount of additional private sector interest. So what we've said in our draft business plan is that we think that it's meritorious to seek federal funding to help close that gap. We're not foolish. We know what the environment has been, but we think that that we'll have a different conversation with the Congress when we're showing both that we have an operating system, that it operates without a subsidy, that we have private sector interest, and that link closing would generate substantially more revenue and public benefit than the cost. If for some reason we don't get that, we can still operate the system and it can still be rational, but that would be a better system and a preferred way to go, and we will continue to seek those funds. At the same time that we're looking at this first operating segment from the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley, we know it's important not only in terms of equity, but also for policy reasons, to make parallel important investments in Southern California. And I mentioned before the corridor between Burbank, Los Angeles Union Station, and Anaheim. There are immediate investments that can and should be made in that corridor. Mr. Morales is going to go into more detail on those, but those investments can have near-term benefits in terms of throughout the Southland, not just in that corridor because of the way that Metrolink and others operate, but also lays down the basis for future high-speed rail service there. And so together with our partners, and here I want to cite the strong leadership of Secretary Brian Kelly and the State Transportation Agency. Secretary Kelly is a huge believer in the statewide rail modernization, which, after all, we're just part of a broader statewide rail modernization, and he has focused very heavily on that. The Secretary, Mr. Morales, and I have been meeting with Southern California transportation leaders to coordinate the timing and the scope of those investments, which we think are vitally important. And I already mentioned the extension to San Francisco and Bakersfield. So on the next chart, I've used the term that we can build this with revenues in hand or revenues that have been allocated to us. And let me just walk through what those are. First of all, thanks to the legislature, I see Senator Galgiani here, who was the author of Assembly Bill 3034, that put Proposition 1A on the ballot in 2008, and that measure provided for $9.95 billion of bond funding for high-speed rail and for connectivity projects. $950 million was for connectivity projects, and I would like to just point out that one of the things that Mr. Morales, Secretary Kelly, and I did in 2012 was to encourage our administration to release those funds. Two different administrations had held them back until they could see whether there was going to be a high-speed rail system. Those were very important funds for Amtrak upgrades, for commuter corridors, for BART car replacements, and for many other things. And those dollars have been flowing, and they flow from the high-speed rail program to those local agencies. And so that was an early promise that we made that we certainly did fulfill. So we have the bond funds, and the bond funds now, this legislature has appropriated $2.7 billion of those bond funds to be used to complete the Central Valley work. With other commitments, you also appropriated $500 million of those bond funds to fulfill a memorandum of understanding that we entered into with Southern California Transportation Partners, and $600 million of those bond funds for a separate MOU that we entered into for the Caltrain electrification program. Those appropriations have already been made. There's about $4.1 billion of unappropriated bond funds left. We have about $3.3 billion of federal money. You have also appropriated that through SB 1029 in 2012 so that we can use those funds for the Central Valley construction. We are doing that right now. And then the cap and trade proceeds. And let me just say this very quickly. We won't be able to go into much detail on cap and trade because we are, after all, simply a recipient agency. And the legislature has given us a continuous appropriation of 25% of cap and trade proceeds. And we're very aware that there's a question about the pendency of that program past 2020. I would only say two things to you. For purposes of our planning, we have been told to assume that because the state ARB has continuing regulatory authority and because of other actions, frankly, that the legislature has taken, such as the passage of Senate Bill 9 last year, which passed near unanimously and which contemplates cap and trade revenues after 2020. While we're aware of the dialogue and we hope that that will be clarified for other reasons, our planning assumption is that it continues at this point. And there's not a whole lot we're able to tell you beyond that, but that is the assumption. With those proceeds, we would look at about $5 billion as pay-as-you-go monies, and then after 2022, we would be financing off of that to help accelerate the completion of the first operating leg. I just want to end my part of the presentation by not that I need to remind you, but I need to tell you that we are constantly reminded that what we're building has to be consistent with Proposition 1A. No operating subsidy, electric powered, connecting the major regions of the state, and being designed to achieve sustained speeds of 200 miles an hour with segment travel times that are listed. You know, we agreed in 2012 at the behest of members of this legislature and members of the Congress to consider the blended service. And I just want to end by dealing with one very strong misconception that's out there. We agreed to that, and frankly it was recommended by the peer review group and others, because the belief was that we could use the blended system in the urban areas and still meet these criteria of the Bond Act. We still believe that today. And if you're on high-speed trains coming into Paris, they're not going 200 miles an hour. They slow down in the urban areas. That was always the intent, even for California high-speed rail. The maps going back to 2008 show 120 miles an hour in the urban corridors. That was always the intention. And so we really have not, it is not true that using the blended system impairs our ability to meet Proposition 1A. And that is the reason that we are doing it, because it saves substantial money. So with that, thank you very much. We certainly look forward to answering your questions. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, our CEO, Mr. Morales. Thank you.
Thank you.